I'm actually just going to talk about TCP port scanning. There's a lot of different types of port scanning. You can do UDP, you can do SYN, you can do ACT. I'm only going to be talking about TCP port scanning. There is other ways you can do it, but just for this talk, I'm only going to do TCP. And I just want to start this off with a legal disclaimer. Only port scan on servers that you own. Don't port scan on websites on the internet. Don't make sure you own the domain. Is what I'm trying to say. Make sure you own the server. If it's in your cloud environment, that's okay. Just don't start port scanning. ISPs can actually detect it, and you could end up in prison because depending on which state you live in. So just be very. It's fine if you're doing penetration testing on your own network. It's not okay to do penetration on other people's networks without their knowledge or consent. You can also use something called Nmap for port scanning. However, I just want to bring up that using Python for port scanning has a lot of advantages. You can actually make your own integration tests for your security. And you can say, are these ports open? And you can test it. And you could bring it into, if you're doing some sort of exploit script for penetration testing, you can do reconnaissance and exploitation of the same script. So you can say, is port 22 open? If so, do this exploit. Is port 25 open? If so, do this. There's a lot of different options. So I'm just going to start off by, the only package you need is socket. I'm going to use my own website in the beginning. So this is a website I obviously own, so I don't have to worry about legal ramifications about this. This IP address is also an IP address I own too, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to comment this out. If I run this code, you can run the socket get host name and then print but, and you'll actually get the IP address of this using this method, get host by name. None of the ports are open on this though, so I'm not actually going to test with KeeganJustis.com. I'm just going to test with the server IP address. You also get the fully qualified domain name. In this case, I'm using AWS. So the way TCP port scanning works is it sends initial requests to the client, and then you get a request back. And once you get the request back, you send a confirmation. It's a handshake. It's a three-way request, and that's how this port scan is going to work. Things you should be aware of is if there's firewalls. So in AWS, for example, or in most cloud environments, Azure, GCP, there's NACLs, and these are firewalls at the subnet level. They're stateless, so if you send a connection outbound, it won't remember when it comes inbound. So you have to have open outbound and inbound, even for outgoing traffic. Security groups, and these are done at a instance level. So this could be an EC2, this could be a relational database, any of the AWS services where there's an instance, you have a security group. Even Lambda functions have security groups, but you can't port scan on those. And then there's operating system firewalls. So this is like IP tables. There's a lot of open source ones as well. And this is at this level. And in order for a port to be open, you need it to be in use. You need that all the firewalls to allow traffic, and you need a route to get there. So you can't, for example, do port scan on somebody's personal network and you don't have internet access there. Also, you would need their firewall to allow that port to be open, and the port has to be in use. So if you're trying to look to see if port 443 HTTPS traffic is open and they don't have a web server running, or they don't have any applications where using 443, you actually it'll show up as closed. Even though the port isn't in use, you need it to be in use to tell. So I've SSH into my EC2 instance. I can actually run this command, netstat -tunlp, and I'll get a list of processes and their ports. So you can see a couple of these are loopback addresses. We can see port 22 is open because I've connected by SSH. And I should also prefix all the commands in here are going to be on Linux. I'm not going to do any PowerShell. And this is a similar process. And some of these flags won't work on Mac OS. So these are Linux only commands. So this is how I would tell if there were what connections, what ports are in use. I can run IP tables to see the list of this. So this is like an internal firewall at the operating system level. There isn't any rejections. I added this extra rule or input for port 10. I'm going to demonstrate this in a second. And I will use this in a little bit. So Netcat is a utility, and I can use this to put a port in use just to test. So let's say I want to look at the list of ports 1 to 100. There's over 6,000 ports, but let's say I just want to do one for 100 right now. I'm going to do a for loop for each port. Socket.socket. The first argument specifies that this is IPv4 and not IPv6. And the second specifies that this is TCP and not UDP or ICMP. I set a timeout just for a second, just give it a little bit of time. And then based on result, I can tell if it's open or not. So if I run this right now, actually I should probably run each of these. And so they're all closed. It looks like port 22 is open, and that's expected because I'm SSH in, and I believe everything else is closed. So what happens, but if we look at the net IP tables, we notice that there aren't any IP addresses that are, we don't see any rules blocking anything. So if we run netstat, we can see the port addresses are in use, but we can actually use Netcat. I'm going to copy this command up here, netcat -l, and I'm going to do port 10. So this, I have to use sudo. So this will use port 10. And now if we run this again, port 10 is open because it's in use. So you have to have a port in use in order for the scan to find it. And you also need, you can go into AWS, Zoom allows me. You can go in here. I have a NACL, or network access control. I can edit this. So I have to move it around Zoom. This is just a sample environment. And I could say, edit the inbound rules. So this is at subnet level. This is applied. What if I only want to allow, so this allows all traffic right here. And if I run this and I say port 23, random port, save changes. And then I go back, run this again. And we'll see port 10 is closed now because the firewall is blocking it at the subnet level. Run this again. And that's the core of my presentation. Of course, you can modify this. You can change these parameters for IPv6, or you can change the socket stream to allow ICMP or other types of port scanning. But this is an overview of TCP/IP port scanning. Any questions?
I had a question if nobody else did. I saw you were using socket.connect.ex,
Yep.
and I was unfamiliar with that. I'm familiar with Socket Connect, but I didn't know exactly what this does. What's the difference?
So you're probably looking,
It was down on the bottom part. Yeah. Result equals s dot connect ex.
so this returns an error if it fails. And so that's how I'm able to tell if it's closed or if it's open. Because you can port scan, but if a handshake, doesn't return correctly, this is how you tell if a handshake was successful, and that determines if a port was open or not. Does that make sense?
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I think it returns an integer instead of just raising an exception, because I think socket.connect would just raise an exception.
Yeah.
It must be just a slight difference in the API for some reason.
Well,
Anyway, that's kind of
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it, but thanks for letting me know.
You can see it's closed, and you can adjust that with firewall.